Hello, Conan Exiles. How are you today? I'm glad to hear everybody is doing great. I know it's late, but that's how we roll. So I guess it would be a perfect time to tell you a story. Well, tonight's story we're going to focus on a place everyone knows quite oh so well. But what you don't know is how dangerous it can really be. You will learn about what that is, though. Come with me as we explore the dark and the mysterious. As we know, America is a place of breathtakingly beautiful natural wonders. From the forests and the mountains of the Northeast, to the beaches of the Southeast coast, to the snowy landscapes of Alaska, and all the way to the deserts of the Southwest. And nowhere is that more beautiful or evident than at the Grand Canyon, a stunning vista where it seems that you can see into forever, and where at the same time it seems like you're looking into a painting. It's almost mind-numbing just how big it is. According to the U.S. Department of the Interior, the Grand Canyon National Park is actually bigger than the entire state of Rhode Island. It's so big, in fact, that it influences weather patterns and took more than 6 million years to form, and has more than 1,000 caves in it. In fact, there are so many caves that no one's entirely sure just how many there actually are. Yet recently, a New York Post investigation in 2023 recently found that it is also the deadliest national park in the country, with the most number of missing persons in the nation. The findings say that extreme weather and elevation changes make the trails challenging, and some hikers don't take proper precautions. But if you dig around just a little bit, since 2018, 6 people died in the park and 56 others went missing. And from 2018 to February 2023, visitors filed about 1,100 missing person reports. A retired chief of emergency services at the Arizona park actually told the Post that people die from heat stroke, lightning strikes, drowning on the river, suicides, accidental falls, air crashes, and more. He estimated that during his time at the park, about 12 people died in the canyon every single year. Now, this number is vastly different from what they reported to the New York Post by the Department of the Interior. They also say just last month, a 36-year-old woman from Indiana died while attempting to hike to the Colorado River and back in one day, according to the National Park Service. Soon after emergency crews reached the unconscious woman, her pulse had stopped. Resuscitation efforts were not successful. Shortly after that, a statement from the NPS said, "It does not recommend hiking the rim to the river and back in just one day due to weather extremes. But a lot of people found it really odd that someone who was experienced as this woman was at hiking and as well prepared as she always was for hiking the rim there and back in one day should have been easy for her. She had done the trip multiple times." And now, with that being said, park rangers at the Grand Canyon National Park strongly urge visitors, especially inner canyon hikers and backpackers, to be prepared for excessively hot days in the coming weeks. In the summer months, temperatures on exposed parts of the trail can reach over 120 degrees in the shade. Park rangers do not advise hiking in the inner canyon between the hours of 10 and 4, as most heat-related illnesses are from hikers on the trail between these hours, they also say. Altitude sickness is to blame, because it makes a challenging hike more rigorous. Elevation changes also make the canyon dangerous. The north rim sits at about 8,000 feet, and the south rim reaches up to about 7,000 feet. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, spending time at that elevation puts a person at risk of altitude illness caused by lower oxygen levels. Even in its mildest form, altitude sickness triggers headaches, tiredness, nausea, and vomiting. More extreme forms can cause extreme fatigue, drowsiness, confusion, and coordination loss, as well as shortness of breath. According to the CDC, the steep and challenging trails become even more difficult for anyone suffering from those symptoms. For example, about 5.9 million people visit the park every year, and according to the Department of the Interior, the peak time for tourists at the park is summer, the hottest time of the year. So many visitors create some backlog for rescuing, and according to NPS, they say be aware that NPS efforts to assist hikers may be delayed during the summer months due to limited staff and the number of rescue calls, employee safety requirements, and limited helicopter flying capability during periods of extreme heat or inclement weather. The Grand Canyon is the second most visited national park behind the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, which sees 3 times the number of tourists every year. According to the investigation, the parks spanning Tennessee and North Carolina reported 3 deaths and 34 missing persons in the same 2018 February 2023 timeframe. Yet, there are also many never seen or heard from again. Will we ever know what happened to them? Due to how vast the park is, I highly doubt it. Here are a few cases of people who have mysteriously vanished in the Grand Canyon. So, on August 30th, 1869, John Wesley Powell and his expedition did something awesome. They finished their run down the Colorado River and through the Grand Canyon. There hadn't been many people who thought they could do it, but apparently there were hiccups along the way, and strange enough, they were reported dead and impressive not once, not twice, but 3 times. Sadly, not everyone actually made it home. Among the team were a pair of half-brothers from Vermont, Seneca and Oramel Howland. On day 96 of the trip, Oramel tried to convince Powell to give up. Otherwise, they, along with another expedition member named Bill Dunn, were hiking out of the canyon on their own without them. Powell debated but ultimately refused, and the 3 men walked into the wilderness and were never seen again. Powell later tried to find out what had happened to the 3 men, and it wasn't long after that he had heard rumors that they had been killed by a group of Shiwit Indians. Hopefully I'm not pronouncing that right. For next a year, that was seemingly confirmed by a Mormon interpreter who translated for Powell. The Shiwit had mistaken them for prospectors who had attacked one of their own and killed them in retaliation. But that might not be the whole story. Historians now suspect that the interpreter was lying and that the men had actually been killed by a group of Mormons who had thought that they were lawmen. They were coming after them in the wake of the Mormon massacre, which had about 120 members of a California-bound wagon train. Though so much time has passed, will we ever really know? You be the judge. And in our next case, that has nothing to do with mysterious, but more to do with a major asshole, happened in 1993. Robert and Donna Spangler were headed to the Grand Canyon, and while they were there, Donna took an apparent accidental fall. Robert later said that he had looked away to adjust his camera, and when he looked back, she disappeared over the edge. Her body was later recovered from 200 feet over the rim, and that it was seemingly that the Los Angeles Times says not everyone believed was an actual accident, including Donna's relatives. They said she was terrified of heights, and whatever happened there, it had not been voluntary. Now fast forward to the year 2000 to Robert's diagnosis of brain and lung cancer. Thinking that he might be willing to talk, law enforcement paid him another visit, where Robert Spangler actually confessed that yes, he had pushed her, and he also had more to say. He confessed more than that. He also admitted that he had executed his first wife, Nancy, just a few days before Christmas of 1978, also killing their 15-year-old daughter and 17-year-old son. Why, you ask, would he do something so evil? It was all because he wanted to be with his new girlfriend. Those deaths were ruled a murder-homicide, and his marriage to the girlfriend in question ended in divorce. He had married Donna after that and admitted that he had pushed her because he was unhappy in that marriage too. And in 2001, the AP reported that he had been sentenced to life in prison, and his cancer diagnosis was terminal. Guess he's not going to be missed, since he killed everyone. Good riddance to that waste of air. But for our next story, we have Floyd Roberts III, who went for a hike in the Grand Canyon on June 17, 2016. With him was his friend Ned Bryant and Ned's daughter, Madeline. According to Stranger Outdoors, they were the last people to see Roberts. But what happened next was definitely strange. Roberts was a one-time NASA employee, computer programming teacher, and an experienced hiker who had been to the Grand Canyon before. So when they came to a hill during the course of their planned 9-day hike, no one gave it a second thought and they split up. The Bryants went over the hill and Roberts decided to go around with the idea that they'd meet on the other side of the hill. But apparently, Roberts never made it. And when the Bryants backtracked, they could find no sign of him. And then after camping for the night, they decided to hike to an area where they had cell phone reception and called in a missing person alert that kicked off a 6-day search involving 7 ground teams, dogs, and the National Park Service helicopters. They covered an area of 10 square miles, and the only trace they found were footprints. But they couldn't even confirm that they belonged to Roberts. And to this day, he has yet to be found. But sadly, not all mysterious disappearances have an unhappy ending. And sometimes the news is good. One example is found in Martin Edward O'Connor, who has spent the last days of 2019 at the Yavapai Lodge. According to the Washington Post, he was last seen there on December 22nd after having arrived on December 17th. Not long after, he was reported missing, and everyone was advised he was traveling alone, and that if anyone who saw him to please get in touch with the National Park Service. Those sorts of stories tend to not end well, though, especially in the middle of winter, because conditions were difficult, and it had started to snow during the day he was missing. Sometime later, miraculously, the Park Service got a tip that some hikers had spotted him on the New Man's Trail, one of the least maintained and most difficult trails in the canyon. How he ended up there, no one knows, but the tip came in late on Wednesday, and when a helicopter was sent out on Thursday, he was found, with limited resources, said park officials, but alive and well. The rescue team said they were amazed at how well he was doing, but what exactly happened in the 11 days he went missing remains unknown. He hasn't spoken a word about it and won't tell anyone who asks him, because either he didn't remember or it was all a fog. Strange or mysterious? You decide. As for this next couple, strange maybe is definitely in the mood, I'd say. The LA Times reported once that newlyweds Glenn and Bessie Hyde were going to go on a grand adventure down the Grand Canyon, then earn their living not as bean farmers, but on the lecture circuit, talking about their record-breaking trip. They set off on October 20th, 1928, and then stopped off at the local Grand Canyon village to restock their supplies. And there, they were last seen on November 18th. Sadly, this was one dream that never came about, as their boat was found a few weeks later, still afloat and still loaded. Those who had seen them previously said that Bessie seemed hesitant. She clearly didn't want to be there. The dynamics of the relationship are pure speculation, but here's where the story takes a turn. Glenn and Bessie were declared missing in 1928, and years later another party was taking a trip down the same route they had went, and when they came across a woman traveling alone, they asked her to join them, and she did. The Grand Canyon Visitor Center says that it was one night over a campfire that their guide started telling the story of Glenn and Bessie. Shortly after that, she claimed that she was Bessie, and that she had killed Glenn during a fight and wandered off to start a new life as George Clark. If that was all there was to it, then would it be questionable? But after Clark's death, a search of her belongings turned up a birth certificate that identified her, indeed, as Bessie DeRoss, and a marriage certificate for Glenn and Bessie Hyde. So I guess there was no wondering what happened there. But in this next instance, around 2,000 years ago, the mysterious takes charge. If anyone's heard the term Anasazi, which meant two very different things in Navajo, according to the Grand Canyon Visitor Center, it means both ancient ones and ancient enemies. They also say that it was a group of hunter-gatherers who truly started to flourish around 2,000 years ago and settled into the Grand Canyon, where they became skilled basket weavers, artists, and potters. But one day they vanished, and no one is entirely sure what happened to them to this day. Smithsonian puts the development of the Anasazi culture as early as 1500 BC, and says that it was around 1250 that they started building defensive structures and moving their settlements high up into the caves along the cliff faces, and at the end of the 13th century, they fled. Some abandoned old settlements, some left behind buildings newly constructed and half-finished. There's been a few theories over the years, with the longest-running one suggesting that there was a cataclysmic drought that forced them to move elsewhere. But some historians aren't satisfied with that. They had weathered droughts before. Others suggest an outside threat, but there has never been any evidence found of other people. Now there's another theory gaining traction. The Anasazi were split into alliances, attacking tribes and families of their own, slaughtering others and executing those who didn't agree with their ideas. It would certainly explain the fortifications and the mass disappearances. Those who didn't die fled persecution, but this is based purely on speculation because we will never know what truly happened to them, as it was so long ago. and anything could be learned from that situation is long ago lost. But as for this next story about Bert Loper, some people seem to be plucked straight out of an adventure novel, and Bert Loper was one of those guys. In 1920, he was a lead boatman on a survey mission along the area of the planned Hoover Dam. And according to the Paris News, he spent most of his life as a river runner. But he didn't let age get in the way either. In 1939, the 70-year-old Loper boated a 250-mile stretch of the upper Colorado, and for his 80th birthday, he planned another trip. Only this time it ended in tragedy. On July 8, 1949, his boat capsized for only the third time in his 56-year life on the river. Loper vanished beneath the foaming waters. A search party was immediately sent out, and they did find his boat, but not him. Later, Loper's wife returned the following year to try to find out just what had happened. She was unsuccessful, and the year after that, she returned again to the site where Loper's boat still sat. There, she built a memorial from Grand Canyon marble and left a bronze plaque that read, Bert Loper, born July 31st, 1869, lost July 8th, 1949. The grand old man of the Colorado River, I belong to the wondrous West, and the West belongs to me. His remains were never recovered until 1975, which was 26 years later. He was ultimately buried beside his wife in Salt Lake City. Now on May 12, 1992, Danny Ray found a Dr. Smock, strolled out of the Arizona State Prison, and disappeared. The New York Times described him as an Army veteran with extensive training in survival and reconnaissance, which went a long way in explaining how he was able to evade authorities for such a long time. So he was already serving 4 life terms for bank robbery and looking at extradition for a murder case. And when he escaped, fleeing from the police in a series of stolen vehicles and leaving behind notes that demanded the release of his brother, who was serving a 29-year prison sentence. During his bizarre plan to kidnap a family and ransom them for $1 million and his brother's freedom, he kidnapped an Arizona couple and forced them to drive him to the place he spent much of his time on the run, the Grand Canyon. According to AP, he left 2 other kidnapping victims tied to a tree near the Grand Canyon National Park and headed off on foot to evade capture. He then ended up leading law enforcement on a wild goose chase that lasted almost 8 weeks and involved more than 400 agents from the FBI, Border Patrol, and National Park Service. He was finally caught when he broke into a home in Grand Canyon Village to get a drink. The homeowner, however, spotted him and called the police, who actually found him sleeping on a neighbor's deck. In 2006, a woman, Tomami Hanamure, turned 34 years old, and for her birthday, she had decided to do something epic. She left her home in Japan and went on a trip that included a visit to Havasu Falls on the Havasupai Indian Reservation. She had been staying in a lodge as she explored the area, and on May 9th, when the cleaning lady found she hadn't been back to her room, they kicked off a search for the missing biker. Well, you can only guess what happened next. She was found stabbed more than 10 times, and to this day, they don't actually know what happened. Alright, you guys, as for our next story, we will talk about, on August 30th, 1869, John Wesley Powell and his expedition. I don't know if you guys were here for the first part of the story, but if not, you can rewind and you will find out the rest of that. because these are like mixed stories about the Grand Canyon and what's happening there and all the disappearances and stuff like that. Hope you guys are enjoying story time with me. And if you are, or if you want me to tell any tales or anything else, feel free to comment, and I will be more than happy to make a story about that as well. Or you can send me a message anytime. Alright, so the next part we're going to talk about what my favorite poem is. So my favorite poem is Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. But right before I tell you guys that one, I'm going to give you one last story. And that will be about Tamami Hannah Murray when she was found stabbed. So she had been stabbed actually 29 times. But what had happened in the time that she had been missing, after a months-long investigation, things to be wrapped up. An 18-year-old man named Randy Redsell was charged with her murder, but his motive was actually theft. He was looking for cash to fuel his drug habit, and investigators said that she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's not entirely the end of the story, though. Their accounts of the abuse he suffered at the hands of his father was what caused him to do something. The consequences of a traumatic childhood laid bare. But apparently he was suffering from domestic abuse, so it caused him to do that, and it was sad. So there's actually a lot of stories around the Grand Canyon, but we could say that was altitude sickness, or we could say that it was what they were saying that it was. We don't know. If anybody has any stories about the Grand Canyon that they would like to share, go ahead and comment. But I know that's one place I'm not going to be visiting. Anyways, my favorite poem, Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year, he gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep. And miles to go before I sleep. Okay, you guys, I hope you enjoyed story time with Mermaid, your girl, me. And I will catch you next time. Thank you.